Present.
Director Tibbetts-Knott.
Present.
Thank you.
So we're taking things a little bit out of order. We're very fortunate that we are going to have a presentation on behalf of the Barr Foundation. And as many people know, we're very fortunate in our community that Mr. and Mrs. Hofstadter are very, very committed to the success of our community in many philanthropic ways and also in many policy ways. So the Barr Foundation has done a lot of great work over the years in transportation and environment. And as almost everybody here knows, Director Skelton Roberts previously worked with the Barr Foundation and is responsible for some of the work that we're going to hear from Lisa and Steve. So we thought it would be helpful, especially for some of the board members who are a little bit newer to this, to hear some of the work that's been done over the years by the Barr Foundation with respect to polling on issues affecting transportation and transit. So first we're going to hear from Lisa Jacobson. She's the Senior Program Officer for Mobility at the Barr Foundation. And then the person who's done the work for the Barr Foundation and for Lisa and for Mary, Steve Casella, who is the head of MassINC polling. So if you two guys want to step up to the microphone.
Great, thank you.
You were expecting more of an introduction. That's kind of, you know.
Delightful introduction.
Yeah, we're very spare here in our praise.
Thank you, Chairman Gwynn, Secretary Tibbetts-Knott, General Manager Eng, and the members of the board. I'm Lisa Jacobson. I manage our mobility grant making at the Barr Foundation. And the work that I'm fortunate enough to focuses on reducing and preventing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation in Massachusetts by supporting policies and programs that equitably advance low-carbon modes of transportation and communities that enable people to access what they need. Ensuring that we have public transit systems across the state that are reliable, affordable, equitable, and safe is a key focus for us, and we try to do our part to advance this in multiple ways. Most of our grant making to support this includes supporting community organizing like the Massachusetts Senior Action Council, advocacy and policy work like the Conservation Law Foundation and Transportation for Massachusetts, research and technical analysis like Work from a Better City and Transit Matters, communications, in particular media relations, and polling and focus groups. And we've had a long-standing partnership with MassINC Polling Group, who has led dozens of polls over the last decade to better understand public perception of transportation in Massachusetts. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Steve Casella, the president of MassINC Polling Group.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the polling that we've been doing of residents in Massachusetts for the last, I guess now, 13 years. So we've got data going back quite a long way. We also have a number of very recent surveys, and I'll also just note that my colleague Rich Parr is also on the Zoom, who has also been very closely involved in a lot of this work and can answer some of the very specific questions if after we're done running through the slides, if you have more detailed or technical questions about anything we're talking about. So just a quick overview of the three topics we're going to be covering. We're going to start talking about how people perceive the system right now and how they have historically. We're also going to be looking a little bit at regional differences and opinions, and then talking about how people view the need for revenue for transit at this particular moment in time. So starting off with perceived system conditions, this is a topic which we and before us others have been asking about for a very, very long time. So the three bar sets of bars you see on the screen refer to polls that were done in 2008, before MPG existed, 2012, one of the first polls we did with and for the Barr Foundation, and then one we did just a couple years ago. And the question, which I'll just note briefly, they're all shown at the bottom of the slide. The question on this one was just asking for a rating of the overall quality of the transportation system in Massachusetts. And you can see that overall it has stayed sort of in a similar range. It was a bit higher in 2012, and I just note that in 2022, this was during a particularly difficult time for the MBTA specifically, so I think that had something to do with how the ratings appeared in 2022. But the overall point, I think, the overall trend line to see is that perceptions of the system's condition today have not dramatically changed from where they were either 10 or 14 years ago. What this one looks at is what people see as the most important transportation issue facing Massachusetts. I'd also note that this one was done in October and November of 2023. We also tried to note with the dates of the surveys that were done. And you can see that in this particular survey and at this particular time, looking at all the transportation issues facing Massachusetts, existing public transportation was the issue that people mentioned the most often when you just asked on an open-ended basis what people thought the most important issue was. That's if you're looking at the overall column. If you then scan out to the right, you can see it broken out regionally, and you can see that there are differences depending on where you live as far as what you think the most important transportation issues are to Massachusetts. And most notably, I think the thing that the eye is drawn to are the two 45% and 48% figures for the kind of belt from 495 to 128, and then inside 128, where we see almost half identifying existing public transportation as the most important issue. This one then looks at people's assessment of the quality of the service. This one was done in August of 2023 and was only done with MBTA service area residents. And we basically just asked people to rate the quality of the commuter rail, the ferry, the bus, and then the subway and trolley system. And to summarize overall, less than half gave any of the four elements either an excellent rating or a good rating during as a part of this poll. Notably, of course, is that for the ferry, vastly fewer people have experience with it. So you see there on the right, that gray bar, 42% said that they don't know or just didn't answer the question, which is much higher than the 10 to 15% who answered similarly for the other three modes. One, of course, follow-up question is, well, what about the people who actually know about the system? What about the people who actually ride the T? Do they have a different view of each element of the system? And the answer, particularly for the bus and commuter rail, is there is a higher rating that's offered by riders of the commuter rail, riders of the bus, riders of the subway, for instance. It's much higher for particularly commuter rail and bus riders, where you have a majority calling each of those two elements either excellent or good when you narrow the group you're looking at down to just people who are current riders. Even former riders have an overall more positive view than just the population as a whole. But then when you look at subway and trolley particularly, there's not that same level of gap. There's not the dramatic improvement that you see when you move from just the general population over to the actual riding public. There's a couple pretty optimistic notes that a couple of the polls that we've done over the years have found, which is that people
Take as long as you want on this one.
People tend to think that things can get better, and even that things will get better. And the question here was thinking about 10 years from now, do you think the MBTA will be better, worse, or about the same? And you can see that very few people think that it will be worse. You see 45% overall saying that they think that it will be better, 30% saying it'll be about the same, and then the rest saying either worse or that they don't know. And current and former MBTA users are both about the same on that question. And then we also do a lot of focus groups to kind of dig into, why do people answer each question these ways? And this was just one notable quote that stuck out to us, which was, when you're on your back, there's no place to look but up. So then digging in a little bit to regional differences, because of course one of the things that influences opinion on these issues is just whether people live nearby, what they hear, what they experience, what their neighbors experience, what their family members know about. All of those things play into the development of people's views on transit and the MBTA. So this was a survey that was done during the Orange Line shutdown of 2022. And we did a statewide survey and just asked what people had heard about, basically what news stories had they heard about during the shutdowns. And overall, 43% of residents statewide said that they had heard about the shutdowns. That was the topic that they mentioned. And then you can see a range of other stories that people had heard about in the overall column. But then as you scan out between regions, particularly out as you get into the western and central and the southeast region, a lot less news is getting through about the shutdowns. And you see that, the mirror of that when you look down at the very bottom line, which is nothing. I haven't heard anything. Nothing, no news at all about the MBTA. And you see 44% in the western and central regions, and then 34% in the southeast regions saying that they just haven't heard anything at all about the MBTA, even during what, for all of us in the Boston region, was a very, very busy MBTA news time when it was constantly on the front page and affecting all of our commutes every day. This is another one that we broke down by region, and the question here was basically who you think is most responsible for fixing the current problems, the MBTA. This was in August 2022. And this is another topic which we've dug into and kind of heard a lot about over the years, which is that people have a lot of different views on this, but by and large don't really know how the MBTA is managed, who's in charge of the MBTA, who's in charge of fixing the MBTA. You know, is it the mayor? Is it the governor? Is it the T itself? Is it someone else? MassDOT. We, even during one focus group, when the control board was kind of just gathering steam, they said, you know, we should have a panel of independent experts get in there and really figure out what's going on, which is exactly what was already happening. But just, I think, is illustrative of that this isn't a topic that people know about. They don't know where the finger should be pointed. They don't know who's to blame. They don't know who's kind of responsible for fixing the MBTA. And even as you get in closer to Boston, there's still not really a particularly, solid or consistent view on this. This one is another kind of optimistic note, which is, we just asked which one of these is closer to your point of view. And the dark red bar is that the condition and operations of the T will always be a serious problem. But then the larger dark blue bar is that with the right policies, it could get much better. And you see overall, 55% said that that was their view. 64% of those who rode the subway said the same. So those closest to what's happening at the T were more likely to believe that things actually could get better. And then you see kind of a similar dynamic to what some of the other slides have illustrated, which is that as you move out into the western and central Massachusetts area, they don't get more pessimistic, just more people say, I don't know. And that's what you see in that gray bar there on the right. One other note just that touches on both the regional differences and also the sense of urgency that is kind of felt differently depending on where you live in the state. People in and around Boston are much more likely to say that transportation is a pain point in their everyday existence, with 57% inside 128 saying that that describes their average day, whereas when you get out into the western and central Massachusetts area or down to the southeast, it falls pretty significantly down as far as the percent who said that that's correct, or that describes them. So then the last item we're touching on is people's views of revenue needs. And this first slide just illustrates how long some of the current dynamics that we see with MBTA opinion have been in existence. And the question here was basically, which of these do you think is more responsible for, the shortfalls in the system's funding? And going all the way back to 2008, a pretty significant majority said that they thought waste and mismanagement was more responsible rather than there just not being enough funding. And you can see, again, we had reads on that in both 2008 and 2012. We haven't asked exactly that same question, but did ask a question in a similar vein, which is, which of these two statements is closer to your point of view? The top one being basically that the system has everything that it needs if it would just spend it well, and the bottom one being even if they spent every single dollar well, the state will need more money. And you can see that it's fairly divided, but more people actually think the former, think that the system has all the money that it needs right now. This was in 2021. You can see there are pretty big party differences on that, but even among Democrats, matters are fairly evenly split. It's not like Republicans all think one thing and Democrats all think the other, and independents are somewhere in the middle. And then regionally as well, there's kind of a reasonably consistent view that the state has all the money that it needs, or did in 2021. And this is just one more look at kind of a similar dynamic, which is when you just asked on an open-ended basis, in a few words, how do you think the state should pay for changes to transportation that you'd like to see? And then basically we take all the open-ended comments and group them into topic areas. And you can see that the top one is just use the money that already exists, or back to the old idea of sort of cut the waste or the fat, so to speak. And then the second one was that we should use fair share funds or tax wealthy people. So just a few notes in summary then, one for each of the topics that we've covered. The first is that the perceptions of the system's condition are not new. It's not that things have dramatically worsened in recent years. The overall perception of the transportation system has actually been fairly consistent, going back a pretty long way. The second is just that there are vast differences in opinion and experience and everyday, priorities that people hold depending on where in the state they live, and what transportation modes they have access to, which ones they and their family and friends actually use. And then the third one is just that the public doesn't have the answer on a lot of this stuff. They have lots of views on lots of things and support some things and oppose others, and we have much more detail than kind of the high-level look we looked at here. But there's not a roadmap that if we just ask the right question they would present to us that's going to be the solution. They have lots of ideas about revenue, lots of ideas about operations and management, but not the answer. That's not something that a poll can really give us. We can tell you what the public thinks, but they may not think enough about the issue to really give us a perfectly neatly packaged answer. But they do prioritize fixing the MBTA, and they're optimistic that it can happen. So that is a very quick tour through 14 years of polling. I'm glad to take questions, and also please do follow up with us if we can offer more detail on any of these or other questions.
Let me see if Director Skelton Roberts wants to say something to kick off, just because, as we said, you were very involved in a lot of this work.
Just want to say thank you for your continued good work. It is critical that we highlight how much the residents know and where are the opportunities for us to continue to engage residents of the Commonwealth. I think the thing that stuck out for me the most, if you go back to slide number 10, we have been ringing the alarm for decades. We don't have enough funding, we don't have enough funding, we don't have enough funding. And when we get to slide 10 and you ask residents, right, how much of it is related? Those farther from Boston are most likely to have heard little or nothing about the T. Only 2% across the board understand that there's a debt and finance issue. So I think we need to do a better job of talking about the debt and the financing, in particular how it affects the Commonwealth. Otherwise, we're not going to move the dial on that. That's the thing that resonated for me the most. But thank you for your continued work. Love Barr, love the work you guys continue to do. And I think this is why polling and going out to residents really matters.
Thank you, Mary.
The gentleman who wore a green Celtics hat to the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it's celebrating the 18th league record 18th championship the other night, so glad to have it on today. And before I ask the question, I think it's a great opportunity for the MBTA to take advantage of tomorrow's exciting parade and be one of the stars of tomorrow as much as the team. So I think the GM will be talking about that, but had to be rocking the hat today. So congratulations to the Celtics. Steve, I think we've probably been working for the 13 years together. I appreciate, and good to see you, appreciate, and these numbers are the numbers that we continue to see over the years. So I guess the question I have, and I don't know if it's an ability to do the polling, but keying off the last point, how can we identify the depth and breadth of the real challenge we face with transportation across the board? The T, we've identified 25 million in state of good repair. We haven't really identified the MassDOT issues, but I know as was sitting with some mayors and former mayor that the number of 200 million is 3 times less than what we need to be spending each year for Chapter 90, because the bridges are crumbling, the sidewalks are crumbling, the roads are crumbling, 11% of our bridges are poor. How can we get past what has been 13 years or beyond, the people thinking we have enough money and that the system is not in dire need of substantial investment. I don't know if that's something that we can even poll, but that is the real challenge, to identify where we're at, and that no matter what we spend in terms of what we have now is not going to solve our transportation issues. Bridges are going to start closing in other parts of the state. The impact is statewide. So I don't know if there's an answer or polling or over the 13 years we can identify so how we can get the public to understand that we're really trying to change and make a 21st century system, and we don't have the real tools we need to make it happen right now.
Yeah. One thing that we have also found over the years is that people, by and large, don't comprehend large numbers in terms of how big they are or aren't, and the difference between, one description of a few hundred million and another description which has a few more hundred million doesn't really affect how they view the number, It would perhaps if it's broken down to like a monthly amount per person, but, we've done it in focus groups where we have these large numbers shown, and there's just there's nothing to relate billions of dollars for an average person versus a high number of hundreds of millions of dollars. 900 versus 1.1 doesn't relate specifically to a person's experience.
So can I speak to that, because I think it's a great point. I think what we have not been able to do is say, do you drive over that bridge in your small community? Do you drive on the turnpike? Have you noticed that the sidewalk, so it's not about the number, it's about the impact that you have, because sooner or later that bridge you're riding over is going to be closed if we can't fix them. And so is there a way to maybe get away from the big numbers and get it to a place where people understand locally that, and start to realize, the bridges are safe, but if you drive on the turnpikes, you see a lot of bridges with wooden slats under them. That means that they're picking the little pieces of the road that would be falling on cars to protect them. I notice it because I'm on this board, but that's throughout the Commonwealth. It is impacting us individually. It's more than the numbers. It's the state of the system that is impacting our ability to build a 21st century system. So I don't know if polling or messaging or what we can do to let people know the numbers are astronomical. We struggle with it. But what do we need to do to start to really fix a system that's broken?
I think some of the question too is who exactly are you trying to influence and why, in the sense of, ultimately legislators are the ones who will approve or not approve the funding, and it's possible that the public's views of things may change some, but they may change a lot, but they also may not change at all. But in any of those instances, the need will be the same, so I think figuring out what the path is from here to there is important when it comes to, who are you actually trying to influence with any messaging that might be offered. One other note on something that you mentioned is that we've often found that people trust the people who are closest to them more than people who are further away and more abstract. So local leaders, your own representative, your own mayor, tend to have a higher level of trust than people who are progressively further away. People are more into the idea of funding things regionally than raising, statewide taxes, those kinds of things. So some of the answer may also just be that, the messaging has to come from closer to home, or that the urgency has to come from closer to home, where it's that bridge, it's not all bridges, it's that station, it's Wyoming Hill, it's not the Orange Line, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation and the work you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Lisa, do you have any closing comment? Oh, sorry.
I just want to build on something that Director McGee said, which I think is really important. I do think we do need to paint a picture of what the opportunity looks like, or the opportunity cost of not doing this. But I do think there's some value in helping people recognize what is the daily cost, the monthly cost, the yearly cost, because the numbers are so big. Most people, when they buy something or they make an investment, they really try to figure out, what am I paying for this thing over a period of time? I would love to see some polling that helps people figure out, if we got, 6 million residents in the Commonwealth, is that right? A little under 7. What would it cost per person by month or per year? It might make the numbers a bit more tangible for folks, and I'm not sure we've ever done something like that, so.
Yeah, it's been quite a number of years, but I mean, and inflation's, changed what the numbers looked like. We did it back in 2011, but, and actually found majorities would pay a certain amount per month back then, but have not done anything like that since. So, yeah, that would be interesting.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate your interest in maybe doing some more stuff in the future. But, thank you. This was great. The next item on the agenda will be discussed in executive session. The board will return to open session at the conclusion of the executive session. Staff have requested that the board enter into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining. I have determined, and the chief counsel concurs, that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the authority. Director Butler will recuse himself from this discussion. I will accept a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved.
Is there a, Noah, please call the roll.
Chair Glenn.
Yes.
Director Butler.
Yes.
Director Goodwine.
Yes.
Director Koch.
Yes.
Director McGee.
Yes.
Director Skelton Roberts.
Yes.
Director Smart.
Yes.
And Director Tibbetts Not.
Yes.
Thank you.